The Sweet Goodbye, written by Ron Corbett, performed by SHELDON ROMERO. To Julie Oliver. Prologue. The first time I worked undercover, I arrested my brother. Now, we were both beat cops in Detroit, and I didn't feel bad about what happened to him. An undercover ATF agent told me once that if you believe the Bible, betrayal is the second thing people ever did. He was a good agent. He was a good man. And it was his way of telling me not to feel bad about what I've come to do for a living. See, he was a man of faith as well, so he probably believed he was offering me the gift of forgiveness. Now, I didn't tell him that I never really worried about it. The people I befriend, the people I betray and eventually send to prison, well, they're people you never want to meet, that the planet is a lot better off without. They live and wreak havoc in a near-alternative universe of depravity and wealth, violence and deceit. They're monsters that have taken human shape. And you know what? I believe that. There are monsters out there, and unfortunately my kid brother is one of them. It took all of 45 minutes for my first field commander to convince me to work undercover, that my brother had crossed a line that should never be crossed. It was what any good cop would want. Today, I look back on that conversation and really can't remember why any of it surprised me. My kid brother had crossed a line. I see lines crossed all the time now. No one around me drives straight, and no one is what you would ever call honest. I've been working undercover for 12 years now. Maybe that's why I'm having trouble shaking my last case. There were too many lines got crossed, too many crooked rides. I'm not doubting my actions. I don't think that's it. I'm just not understanding why I've been left feeling guilty about them. See, I've been trying to figure that out, starting with the night I met Travis Lee, because that's when I think the case started. The true date. The first time something seemed different about that investigation. That's what I've been looking for. Things that were different. Now, I haven't found much. The only thing so far is I think that what happened in Maine last spring might have been a love story more than anything else. Yeah, it might have been just that. Now, I'm not sure if I'm right about this. Not sure if it's all that important, even if I am right. So why bother mentioning it at all? See, I don't have those answers. All I know is that it strikes me as the one thing that was unusual about that case. And maybe, just maybe, the one thing we all missed. Chapter 1. Travis Lee left the Starlight Club and stumbled toward the cab pulling up to the curb. He bounced off the rear panel, bounced off it again, then found the door latch and steadied himself. He turned to the woman beside him and yelled, "Ta-da!" After that, he opened the door and fell inside. The woman didn't move. She was a tall woman dressed in a full-length mink coat that shimmered beneath the neon lights outside the nightclub, made the fur look like a gasoline spill rippling upon dark water. In a few seconds, the cabbie got out to see what was happening. He looked at the woman, then at the open door, then leaned in the car and gave Lee a shake. When he stood up, the woman asked, "Is he passed out?" I don't think so, ma'am. He's not snoring or nothing." "Trav, darling," she yelled into the cab, "you need to put your legs inside the car. The man can't wait here all night." But there was no answer. Here, hold on, man. Let me give him another shake," said the cabbie. "What's his name, by the way?" "His name is Travis Lee." "Really?" No, I'm just having fun with you. Can't you see I'm having fun?" The cabbie looked startled. Then he blushed and put his head back inside the cab. "Hey, Mr. Lee, your wife can't get in. You need to sit up, sir." "Sir? Sir, do you hear me?" The woman pursed her lips and waited, in anger or anticipation. It was difficult to tell. She had lips that might always leave you guessing about something like that. Eventually, she bent her head and whispered something in the cabbie's ear. His body twitched as she was talking, but when she was finished, he nodded, grabbed Lee's legs and started pulling him from the cab. When he was halfway out, the woman grabbed one of the legs and helped finish the job. They slowed a bit when Lee's head was coming out, but not enough to stop it from bouncing off the curb. It was a low curb. They slowed, but there was still a bounce. When he was laid out on the sidewalk, the woman stepped over him and got into the cab. The cabbie looked around a second, embarrassed, it was easy enough to tell, but when his eyes stopped darting around, he ran to his door, got in, and drove away. Through the rear window, Amanda Lee could be seen shaking snow off the collar of her coat. Damn, that was cold. I looked at the departing cab, then back at Travis Lee. Almost a Muddy Waters song. March in northern Maine? It was still cold enough to kill someone if they were left passed out on a sidewalk for the night. I looked around but saw that the cabbie had been right. No one else was outside the nightclub. Last call in 20 minutes and not a car in the parking lot. Well, except mine. I was parked 20 feet from the front entrance. Good chance it was going to stay that way. I reached inside my jacket pocket for my phone, about to make an anonymous 911 call. If that could have happened, that simple act of placing a phone call, a lot of things would have played out different in Birmingham. Now, I'm not saying that some people would still be alive or that failure would have become success, nothing as grand as that, but it would have been different. What happened, and probably not as bad. What did happen that night was 3 men suddenly came running down Delco Street. It looked like they were trying to make last call at the Starlight. They were dressed in dark green factory pants, heavy work boots, and plaid jackets. They ran past Lee, lying there in his blue suit and camel hair overcoat, shiny black shoes pointing toes up like garden spikes. They just looked at him but kept going. I watched them make the front door of the Starlight but not go through. Watched them stare over their shoulders, talk among themselves, laugh, and just like I knew they would, watched them come walking back. Damn, this really is a Muddy Waters song. They had surrounded Lee by the time I got there. 2 of the men were staring at him. One of them was a fat man with a belly so large it had the contours of a baby seal. The other was whippet thin, with dark cratered skin and sunken cheeks, restless eyes that darted around like mercury droplets. A bad meth addict. The third was a boy, a teenager poking Lee with the toe of his work boot, chuckling and waiting to see what might happen. "Good evening, boys. Want a hand getting him back in a cab?" I asked. The boy put his boot down and looked at me. His face was covered in zits, half of them popped, so there were blood trickles on his cheeks. His skin was pale, and with the red lines on his face, he had the coloring of a clown. "Look like a 4-man job to you?" he said. "Well, you never know. He does look like a big enough lad." "Thanks, pal, but we got it covered." "Are you sure? I figure a working man can always use an extra hand, you know what I mean?" The boy looked at me with an expression so curious and uncomprehending, I felt a pang of sadness. This was a kid who needed things simple and linear. No curves, nothing unexpected. We stared at each other a few seconds, but it was the fat man who eventually said, "Hey, you're too late, asshole. Bugger off." "Bugger off? What are you talking about? I'm just here offering to help." "Yeah, help yourself to his pockets, I'm betting. Well, it ain't happening for you today, buddy." "What the? Are you accusing me of being a thief?" "I ain't accusing you of nothing, asshole. What I'm telling you is if that you don't fuck off right now, I'm gonna stomp your head till you're stupid. You missed your chance. Come back trolling another night." His friends laughed when he said this, and the fat man broke into a broad smile. Their laughter continued for several seconds until they noticed I wasn't leaving. "Are you fucking thick?" said the fat man, taking a step toward me. But the whippet didn't move. He licked his lips and turned to stare at the front door of the Starlight. The clown boy did the same. It would just be the fat man. When the swing came, it was a haymaker, and that's what I'd been expecting. I'd already placed my bet on by the way I was leaning, so that when it came I could step under it easily, be in the crouching position when I brought my fist up as a perfect 60-degree arc, at double the normal traveling distance for an uppercut, landing it right where a man would never want a punch like that to land. The fat man grabbed his groin and tottered several seconds before he fell, and when he did fall, it was sideways and slowly, Like a felled tree might fall if it got tangled up in the branches of another tree. Several seconds passed after that before he screamed, and when it came, it was like the screaming of late-stage childbirth. He was still screaming like that, his friends dragging him into the shadows surrounding the nightclub, when I heard a man's voice say, "Well, that was rather fun to watch. Why in the world did you bother?" I looked down at Travis Lee. He was sitting now, rubbing his head and looking at me. I thought about the best way to answer his question and decided to go with a partial truth. "I work for you, Mr. Lee." Chapter 2. A light snow had started falling, and Lee looked up and down Delco Street, looking for his cab, looking for his wife, and looking for more men approaching. I wasn't sure. He didn't seem in a hurry, didn't seem surprised that he had just awoken on a sidewalk outside a nightclub either. "You looking for me?" "Only been with you a little while, Mr. Lee. I'm a tree marker, working your Algoma limits right now." I could see now that Travis Lee looked like his surveillance photos. Sometimes there is a discrepancy and you wonder about that later, the things a camera can't seem to catch. But with Lee, there was no surprises. He looked like the photos. 55 years old, a prosperous middle-aged ex-jock, still with a full head of blonde hair, more girth around the middle than when he'd played college football for Harvard, but still handsome in a middle-aged jock way. If you had to guess his occupation, you might have said lawyer, and you would have been right with your first guess. Although being born in Birmingham, Maine meant Travis Lee was also part of the family business. Lee Forestry Products, one of the oldest lumber companies on the northeastern seaboard. Do you need another cab?" I asked. "I think the first one is gone." "Well, appears my wife is gone as well. Hey, what's your name, pal?" "Oh, my name is Danny Barrett." "Hey, can you give me a hand, will you? Seems like I owe you a drink. Well, let's go inside and I'll settle my account." We walked to the back of the Starlight and sat on stools. The nightclub, I found out later, was built in the 40s, and it looked it. A large club laid out for big bands and jitterbug dancing with the floor in front, a stage beyond that, circular tables fanning out from the dance floor all the way to the back of the room, where the bar was. There were chandeliers, a fading mural of a starry night, and red leather booths big enough to seat 6 people easy. A gilt-edged mirror hung behind the bar, with tall shelves of liquor bottles spaced about every 6 feet. The club even had 2 wooden phone booths, the ones with the accordion doors and inside seats. The phones still worked. The phone books were from 2002. We sat at the bar and Lee ordered a McCallum's Neat with Pabst Chaser. "The Algoma limits," Lee said when our drinks arrived. "That must mean you're working out on the Sleigh Bay Mill. I haven't been in that mill in months. How come you know me?" "Well, see, Birmingham isn't that big a city, Mr. Lee. Anyone in town richer than you?" Well, my brother, my wife one day, maybe." "Well, listen, I know you, Mr. Lee. I suspect everyone in Birmingham knows you as well. That was your wife who left in the cab?" "Tall, good-looking woman in a ridiculous fur coat?" "Don't know about the fur coat part, but the rest of it sounds about right." "Yes, that would have been the lovely Amanda. Appears she has jumped ship on us, Mr. Barrett. We shall have to continue the voyage without her." He laughed when he said that, and then he took a swallow of his scotch. His face winced when the liquid hit the back of his throat. His body shivered for a second, but then his jaw went slack. His eyes closed, and when they reopened, he looked happy. "Oh, you're not from around here, are you?" "That obvious? No. I'm from Detroit." That's an odd place for a tree marker to come from." "See, my uncle owned a lumber company in the Upper Peninsula near Escanaba. Spent my summers working there when I was a boy. He taught me how to do it. He told me once that a man who can work a timber limit and mark only the best pine and the best cedar, the man that could do that was worth more to him than a busload of Harvard business graduates." "Oh, yeah, my father would have agreed with him," said Lee. "He sent my brother into the camps to learn stuff like that. But Tuck never took to it. With me, He didn't even bother. He just sent me straight to Harvard. Oh, shit. I'm sorry, Mr. Lee, I said. I knew Lee had gone to Harvard. I didn't mind looking clumsy right then. Nah, don't sweat it. I've heard plenty of Harvard jokes, he said, and motioned to the bartender for another round. So, what was it like growing up in Detroit? It was great. You say Detroit today and people feel sorry for you. But I remember when there wasn't a boarded-up store anywhere. The clubs were booming. I walked into a club once and Benny King was playing. He had a full horn section, too. It was a Thursday night, and there wasn't even a cover. Nah, you're making that up. Want to know what song he was singing when I walked in? Now I know you're making it up. Stand By Me. Heard it for the first time in the Copper Penny Club. Detroit was great. What about Birmingham? Same thing, I suppose. Town was printing money back then, not just the mills. We had a fishing industry once. A lot of the boats worked under sail. Looked like a field of kites out on the St. John some summers. It was beautiful. I'll never forget that. Town's doing okay, though, isn't it? Don't scare me, Mr. Lee. I just got here. Yeah, we're surviving, Danny, like every mill town in Maine is surviving. You came here looking for work, so you must know a thing or two about surviving. Have you taken to it? I think it's better than the alternative. Oh, the wise man's answer. I should buy you a drink for that. Oh, thank you there, Mr. Lee, but I've had enough for tonight. Said I should buy you a drink. Didn't say I would. I don't pay for cliches. The Benny King story was worth a drink. Better than the alternative? That doesn't get you much around here. Well, I'm still calling it a night. Would you like me to get you a cab before I go? Lee seemed to consider it for a minute before saying, Nah, that won't be necessary. Then he took a phone from his pocket and, using the careful gestures of a truly plastered man with experience at being truly plastered, he sent a text. He was careful and slow about it. I doubt if there would have been a single typo. Oh, thank you. I have a ride coming, he said, and put his phone away. We walked outside and stood under the awning. It was snowing heavier now, the flakes falling through the arc of the streetlights and making the street darker than it would have been normally. Hey, listen, thank you for the drinks, I said, and Lee waved me off. An actual reverse swat of the hand. Coming from him, the gesture didn't seem dismissive or patronizing. Didn't anger me the way it might have coming from someone else. We talked about the snow and whether it might be the start of a storm, Lee saying it didn't look like it. We hadn't been doing that more than a minute when a Honda Civic pulled up to the curb. The car had Bondo spots on the hood and rust on every tire well. A woman was driving. Her head was turned, and I never saw Pearl LaFontaine that night. Just saw her yellow dress. So simple it looked like plainsong to me. The zipper and back slipped down an inch. When she leaned over to unlock the passenger door, she kept her head turned, and all I saw was that dress and a flash of red curls, a long, lithe body twisting in the interior darkness of the car. Hey, good luck out on the Algama, Lee said, shaking my hand one last time before he got in the passenger seat. I watched the Honda pull away from the curb, its tailpipe exhaust mixing with the falling snow so that the tires were hard to see, made the car look like a parade float drifting down the street. I remember that. The car seemed to drift away. Chapter 3. The next morning I pulled open the curtains in my hotel room and saw that it had kept snowing. It had capped the roof peaks and church spire around the Three Pines Motel. It also powdered the streets, dusted the fences. It made the world look clean and innocent for a change. It was as though the world got up that morning and decided to dress for a wedding. I looked at the snow and decided to walk to my meeting with FBI Special Agent Paul Linton. Linton was angry, so I wasn't in a hurry. He'd phoned last night to make sure I knew he was angry, calling as soon as I'd lost sight of that Honda drifting down Delco Street. Linton was in his mid-30s. He was in good shape, looked like a former athlete at some Ivy League school, although he could swear like a drill sergeant. I didn't mind the swearing. It was the greased-back hair and yellow ties I might find unforgivable before the investigation was finished. He had been monitoring me from a surveillance van parked blocks away, by way of a camera hidden in a streetlight across from the starlight. "What the fuck did you just do?" he asked when I'd answered his call. "Well, I had a couple of drinks at a nightclub. Not a bad place, really." "You were not fucking authorized to make contact with Travis Lee. You were just supposed to keep eyes on him." "Okay, so you'd rather I let him get mugged? It was a field decision. I'll stand by it." "Damn fucking right you will. Debrief tomorrow, 9 a.m. I showered and got dressed, ate a bowl of cold cereal and then another. There was no hot plate in the room, just a small fridge. I wondered what it would take to be trusted with a hot plate in the Three Pines Motel. I put on my work boots and parka, and by 8:15 I was walking down the service road behind the motel. I had been in Maine for nearly 2 months, but hadn't seen much of the city. I had spent most of my time in the North Maine woods, where Lee Forestry had lumber camps and timber rights. The service road ended at Dickinson Street, a main east-west thoroughfare into downtown Birmingham, and I was soon walking past red brick duplexes with exterior stairwells and small wooden porches, fenced gardens the size of compact cars. The air was cold, and my breath came out in small clouds that spun a few seconds before fading away. A few blocks from the river, I walked past the remains of the Davidson Struthers footwear factory. It took up 2 city blocks, all red brick and busted windows. I found out later that Davidson Struthers used to be one of the largest shoe factories in New England, had a near monopoly on white spats for a while, and was one of the first large factories to close in Maine, before the textile mills even. That morning the factory reminded me of some beast the city had slain, but forgotten to drag away. I tend to work in places past their best before dates, like mill towns that no longer have a mill, or fishing ports where the fish are remembered like mythical beasts, towns and cities where the workforce is unemployed, working recall hours are gone, people having their financial security threatened are what a lot of crime depends on. From what I've seen, this might even be the straw that stirs the drink. The Portland FBI field office seconded me just before Christmas. I stand 6'1", weigh around 200 pounds most days. I like undercover assignments where I can grow my hair long, and I was having no trouble passing as a forestry worker in Birmingham, Maine. It was the Boston field office that had first noticed the money. A wire transfer of $100,000 going from an ecstasy dealer in Rothwell Heights into one of the corporate accounts of Lee Forestry Products. It was sloppy and something had probably gone wrong with the transfer, but it got the feds looking into Lee Forestry for the first time. The company was family-owned, 5th generation to be exact. All assets and equity split between 2 brothers, Tucker and Travis Lee. In the 14 months since that wire transfer, the FBI had located $251 million in the company's bank accounts that lacked provenance. That's the word the forensic accountants like to use to mean no legal or plausible reason to exist. It's a polite word. It allows the accountants to avoid words like crooked or dirty. That one of the oldest lumber companies in Maine could be a Tier 1 money launderer was odd right from the start. What made the case odder was that no one knew where the money was coming from. A lot came in, wire transfers that couldn't be traced back to an original source, but just as much came in cash deposits that went right from cube vans into the vaults of the Birmingham branch of North Maine Savings and Loan. Lumber used to be a cash business, and there were still odd timber boys with backwoods mill yards who operated that way. But $250 million? 6 months ago, an FBI agent had gone undercover at a Lee Bush camp in the North Maine woods to try to figure it all out. He was a good agent, one who had worked many years in Brownsville, Texas, going about as deep underground there as it was possible to go. Some in the Bureau had considered him a rising star. His body was found 3 months after he went into the woods, bobbing under the ice of Barren Lake, about a mile from the bush camp. There had been no indication the agent was under suspicion. There was no warning signs, and no one knew if the drowning had been an accident or murder. I got the call 2 months after that. About normal, I would say, for a high-level racketeering investigation. The time needed for senior law enforcement officers to accurately assess just how badly their case had exploded. The surveillance van was parked on DeChamps Street, 4 blocks from the boarded-up remains of the Davidson Struthers footwear factory. I knocked twice on the back door and it slid open. There were 3 men in the van. When I entered, 2 of them took off their headphones and left. The man who stayed behind sat on a bench at the far end of the van. Paul Linton was wearing a dark blue suit with a yellow tie that morning. The tie knotted so tightly it looked like a suspended kernel of corn glowing in the semi-darkness of the van. "I was told you knew how to do this sort of work," he said when I sat. "And after what I saw last night, I'm beginning to wonder if I was fed a ton of horseshit." It was obviously a line he had clearly rehearsed, so I let him enjoy it a few seconds before speaking. "Well, I don't know what you've been fed," I said. "I do know I didn't have much choice about last night." "Really? What about letting shit happen? I thought non-intervention was a credo for you deep undercover boys like fucking Star Trek or something." "You think we're on a spaceship?" "Don't be fucking cute, Pete. Barrett." "What?" "The name I'm using is Barrett. Never use another name. That's the protocol. You should know that." Linton leaned back and gave me a nasty look. "You were not authorized to make contact with Travis Lee. You were only there to help us keep surveillance on him for 1 night. Do you have any fucking idea how much your little stunt might have cost this investigation, Barrett?" "Probably Jack," I said, flashing him a smile. "Nothing Lee said in that nightclub was going to end up in court. There's nothing there you can use. And what do you think it would have cost the investigation if I'd sat on my ass and let him get his head kicked in?" "That's pretty dramatic. Those men could have rolled him and taken off. No harm, no foul. And that's probably how it would have played out." "That fat fuck was going to kick Lee in the head. No way he was walking away without doing that. Do you need me to file a report on last night?" Linton glared at me and I knew what he was thinking. He was wondering if I knew what I was doing by asking a question like that, getting angrier and angrier when he kept coming up with the right answer. As soon as a report gets written, it gets filed and then it becomes discoverable evidence that needs to be turned over to defense lawyers when charges are laid. But if nothing Travis Lee said in the Starlight was going to be part of the investigation, then Linton could skip the report and maybe even feel clean about what he was doing. He wasn't burying evidence, just not doing his job. "So nothing at all from your little barroom chat with one of the main suspects in this investigation?" he asked. "Well, he misses the old cod boats, the ones with the colored sails. If you can do something about bringing those back, I'm sure he'd appreciate it." "Huh, well, a comedian. Somebody should have warned me. Hold off on the report, please." Linton rapped on the side panel of the van and the 2 other agents returned. They gave me only a cursory nod of their heads before slipping on their headphones. I stood and let one agent, the shorter of the 2, take back his rolling desk stool. There were more wiretap and rolling surveillance operatives than field agents, but they both carried weapons and I figured they both wanted to shoot Linton by now. They had been working with him for about 6 months. The van was set up with the bench on the passenger side of the vehicle and a bank of 4 video monitors suspended above a desk on the driver's side. 3 of the monitors were turned on, and I bent to look at them. 2 of them showed the street outside the surveillance van, front and back. The third showed an office, 3 men sitting around a desk. One of the men was Travis Lee. "Want to see a bit of the show?" asked Linton. "Yeah, sure." Chapter 4 The FBI's plan was simple. $250 million in mystery money should have set off all sorts of warning bells at North Maine Savings and Loan, but not a single chime had rung. The bank manager had to be part of the money laundering scheme. His name was Robert Powell, and he was a high school friend of Tucker Lee. Now, I hadn't seen any surveillance photos of him and leaned in to take a look. Balding, wire-rimmed glasses, mid-50s, a paunch that was present even though I couldn't see it. Robert Powell was what Central Casting would have sent me if I'd asked for a small-town banker. Linton had made his play 3 weeks ago, and the banker caved in the first meeting. He started crying and saying he had been forced into it. Back in '08, when it seemed like the sky was falling, well, the sky, or capitalism, it had seemed the same thing back then. He'd only done it to keep the mills open. He kept crying and saying that until Linton showed him the ownership papers for a 44-foot Sea Ray that he moored at Baja Mar Marina in Fort Lauderdale, and the deed for a Bahamian country home in his wife's name, then Robert Powell stopped crying and asked what it would take for full immunity. Quite a bit, as it turned out, but Powell agreed to all of it. He would wear a wire, his phones could be tapped, home and office, and a camera could be put in his office. But most important, he agreed to kick the Lee money loose. See, that was the play. The banker was going to tell the Lee brothers they needed to get their money out of the bank, that they were going to be given less than a week to do it. Linton was going to sit back and see where they ran. Travis Lee didn't look as bad as I would have expected. The suit looked freshly pressed. His hands weren't shaking. Compared to his brother, you might even say he looked healthy. Tucker Lee wasn't that tall, but he must have weighed close to 250 pounds, or maybe even more. The bank chairs were wooden, and he kept crossing and recrossing his legs. The chairs were probably a tip of the hat to the forestry industry and what it meant to Birmingham. Tucker Lee looked like a man who could have done without the homage. "Are these Henderson chairs, Bobby?" he asked the banker. "Oh, they are, Tuck. Might have been your family's wood that made them back in the 50s. "Well, it sure is. We had that contract. It was Henderson's that were on the Charlie Rose show. Till he got canned, of course. These look like the same chairs, you know." "Any idea how much a chair like that would be worth today, Tucker?" Whoa, don't tell me, Bobby. It'll just piss me off." The two men laughed. Travis Lee smiled but didn't laugh. The office they sat in was nondescript in every way except for the wooden chairs and the black and white drawings on the walls, drawings depicting log runs from the 19th century, the old square timber runs. They had the same runs in the upper Michigan Peninsula. Men would have died on every one of those runs, signing on in the spring and never knowing if they were coming home that summer. No different from combat, no different from heading out to sea either. They died after they were drowned or crushed between the booms, or murdered by one of the criminal gangs that had sailed the St. John back then. The Shiners, the Travelers, the Pat Lowry gang. There were a lot of ways to die on those square timber log runs. It was square timber, the wood once used to build Navy ships, that made the Lee fortune. Andrew Lee arrived in Portland in 1845 from Aberdeen, a young forward steerage merchant who quickly saw that the only serious money being made in Maine was by men who sold square timber. In 1847, he bid on timber rights so high up the St. John River, the land was nearly touching the Canadian border. No one had ever bothered bidding on those rights, and Lee got them for a pittance. The river was wild up there, with Class 3 rapids, waterfalls, and eddy pools. The cost of building dams and chutes to get timber to market was considered prohibitive. No one understood why Lee had purchased the rights, and as he had not been in Maine long, the more experienced lumbermen in Portland snickered at him, wondered if the lad had bothered to look at a map. Andrew Lee surprised everyone by not bothering to build chutes or dams. He just ran the rafts down the river and sold whatever wood made it through. It was so dangerous, it was a wonder anyone took the work, but that was another thing Andrew Lee figured out early. There were always desperate people in this world, and if you had left Europe, the comfort and predictable routine of Europe for a cabin in the Maine woods, You were one of them. Every spring, men would come crawling out of the forest like bears from hibernation, eager to sign up for the Lee log runs. Men with gaunt faces walking beside women with night terror eyes holding the hands of children so malnourished you could almost hear their bones creak whenever a stiff wind passed over them. All that history had been alchemized into black and white etchings of men piloting Huck Finn rafts down calm rivers. "Well, shall we get started, Bobby?" said Tucker Lee, repositioning himself in the chair one more time. "Travis and I are just dying to know why you needed to see us this morning." Yes. Thanks again for coming in so early. I'm afraid there are a few things we do need to discuss." Powell looked nervous when he said that, and Tucker Lee stared at him before saying, "What sort of things are we talking about here, Bobby?" "Well, the sort of things you're probably thinking about, Tuck. Our sideline business." Yeah, well, what about it?" "I can't do it anymore." Tucker stared at his brother, then back at the banker. "I didn't think you could just quit, Bobby. I can't just quit. This is something that needs to be discussed. What's the problem exactly?" "Well, the problem is I don't want to do it anymore. We need to shut the accounts." Whoa. You can't be serious. For what reason?" The reason doesn't matter, Tucker. Those accounts were a service I offered you a long time ago. Thinking it was going to be a short-term thing, I no longer want to offer the service, and I don't have to give you a reason." "Reasons are always good, Bobby," said Travis Lee, speaking for the first time. "Reasons, excuses. I don't like to leave home without one or two in my back pocket. Do you have one of those?" I just told you I didn't need one, Travis. A reason or an excuse. It's my call. Always has been." "Come on, don't be stupid, Bobby," said Tucker Lee. "It's not like Lee Forestry was a fucking savings account with you. Do you know what you're asking us to do?" Yes, I do. I know what I'm asking you to do. I've given it a lot of thought, Tucker, Travis, and this is a decision I'm making." "Why so much thought, Bobby? It's not much work for you. You prosper from it. Why walk away from a good thing?" "Tucker, please." "I'm fucking asking you." Powell leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. When he spoke again, it was with a voice both tired and resigned, a voice that had made up its mind about a bad thing, deciding it needed to be done. This bad thing, whatever the consequences might be, it was a good acting job, although he was a banker, and I told myself I shouldn't be overly impressed. "I'm getting out, boys," Powell said. "This can get nasty. I'm half expecting it, but this is happening, and I'm not going to give you boys a chance to stall or try to talk me out of it." "Oh, what does that mean, Bobby?" "Well, it means you're contacting whoever the fuck owns this money, Tuck, and you're telling them they have to move it out of my bank by Friday. And I'm going to watch you make that call. If I don't watch you place that call as soon as you leave my office, I'm phoning the state banking inspectors and telling them there are multiple problems with your accounts." "You cocksucking little fucking—" Save it, Tucker. This is happening. You're not bullying your way into a different ending. You know, you're an idiot. You'd be just as fucked as us if you called in the banking inspectors. Yeah, but I'll be the first man off ship. I'm going to float better than you boys." "You'd cut a deal?" "In a heartbeat," said Powell, and again I was impressed with his acting skills. Not even the glimmer of a knowing smile. "You've got to move the money, Tucker." "I don't have a way of contacting our partner right now." "Well then, guess what? You're fucked." Powell leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a cocky smile. He might have been in a tough spot, but the two men sitting on the other side of his desk were in a tougher spot, and that was normally enough to make any banker happy. Tucker Lee looked like he was going to explode, but I noticed there was a questioning look on his younger brother's face. The play had been moving at train wreck speed, and Tucker Lee had been swept along in the draft. But there was something in Travis Lee's eyes that made me wonder if he was questioning the story, not the brother I would have expected. The stalemate lasted about a minute and a half. No one talking, no one even moving, no one staring any place in particular. Finally, Tucker Lee sighed, reached into a jacket pocket, pulled out a cell phone and punched a number. In the surveillance van, the silence was so absolute, I heard the beating of another man's heart. The murmur of shallow breaths sounded like waves crashing on a beach. There was a sharp inhale of breath from all of us when Tucker Lee cleared his throat and said, "Bo, I'm at the bank, and we may have a problem."